Okay, got it. Setting
All
up
right.
your meeting for YouTube Live. Just a second. Slow, old computer. 14 years old. Or 13. Got it. Okay, there we go. We're recording.
Right.
Just have to turn off
All right.
the sound there. Good.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you.
We're here again. Yes, there is a scripture that is taken as the absolute, that it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that comes the judgment. From basically that one verse, it's come to Christianity has come to the conclusion that if you don't get your ducks in a row before you die, you go straight to hell with no options. Um, that needs to be researched, and that needs to be checked into, because one scripture is not really sufficient to come to that conclusion that God can't do anything after you die.
Where is that verse?
I'm not sure.
What is it exactly?
Hebrews
Appointed unto man.
Hebrews 9:27, I believe it is. Memorized
Hebrews
it many years ago.
27?
Pretty sure it's Hebrews 9:27. Yeah, just a sec. Double check. Sword drill.
Yes. And as it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this comes judgment.
And I
So
love the
Christ was
context
once
afterwards.
offered. What's that?
The context afterwards shoots that whole doctrine down to hell.
Yeah, and the next verse says, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear second time without sin unto salvation. Anyway, that's a pretty thin argument to say that God cannot do anything after you die. Like Sherry says, to give you an opportunity to see the truth. Because, I mean, when you see a lot of people are brought up in a culture where the truth is set for them and they don't accept it, they die. So most accept it as the fact. And there's no way, except by a revelation that this guy heard from God directly, missionaries aren't allowed, or anybody who could tell them the truth are not allowed in their sphere of influence. So to say, well, okay, you never had a chance to hear the gospel, so tough luck. But Paul did say in Romans that this gospel which I preach, he said, has been preached to every creature under heaven. Now, what that means is open to interpretation. But he said clearly that the gospel that he preached had already been preached to every creature. So he could not be referring to an external preaching of the gospel, because we know there are lots of people over the ages in the dark jungles of Southeast Asia and South America and around the world who've never ever heard the gospel.
Yeah.
Outwardly,
Mhm.
they've never had any witnesses outwardly to preach to their external ears. So it must be the preaching that Christ does within the heart, where he dwells, bringing them, like Paul said in Romans chapter 1, they are all without excuse because the law is written in their hearts. Well, the law and the lawgiver are the very same person. And if the law is written in your heart, then the lawgiver is in your heart, and you have heard the gospel. Whether you understand it or not is another question. Anyway, I wanted to read a couple of verses in James chapter 1, from which we will use as a segue to jump off into the topic I thought about tonight. James chapter 1, verse 13. If you have a scripture there and you want to follow, I'll read in the King James.
King James, really?
I'll read it
18 and 50?
17.
Sean,
17.
Yeah.
Sean, quickly, why do the Muslims hate us so much? Why don't
Well,
they know Jesus? And it's all Allah.
they, yeah, the Muslims are taught that Christians are misguided and that somebody took their Bible and corrupted it.
Mm.
And so it's full of lies. And the main one being that Jesus died, which they believe he did not die. He was taken down off the cross. He was a real person, and they
Mhm.
crucified him, but he was taken down off the cross and he did not die. But he is the judge of all the world, including Muhammad, their prophet. So
And so, but that's our perception. Why don't they believe that?
they do believe that.
So,
They do believe that Muhammad will be judged by Jesus. They believe that Jesus Christ is a prophet. He's not God. He's not the Son of God, but he's a prophet, and he is the judge of the world. And he will judge even Muhammad. He will decide whether Muhammad goes to paradise or not.
is that why they're so
They
angry,
believe-
the Muslims?
Well, they're angry because the Christians have distorted the truth by
Mm.
publishing a Bible that's corrupted and believing lies that Jesus was God, because in their understanding, God would never become a man. That's why he said, that Muslim guy said in that testimony, that God would never become a man. And he says it's
Mm.
impossible for man to become God, and it's just as impossible for God to become a man.
Well, they
So-
also think it's an abomination that we think God came to Mary and impregnated her.
Yeah, they think that the Jesus being born of a woman was that God had sex with Mary, which to them
Is that why they hate
abomination.
women? Sorry. Is that why they hate women
Well, there's other reasons why they hate women.
and
They have
torture
a lot
them?
of reasons for that.
Mm. Sorry, I'm
But the
going
main
off
thing
topic.
is they believe that the Christian doctrine is so evil and so corrupted that they need to exterminate Christians for corrupting the truth.
The
It's
Quran.
in the Quran.
Mhm. Well,
So
Thank you.
they grow up with
Well, that makes
they
sense.
grew up with a teaching that their job is to exterminate the infidels,
right.
to rid the earth of these evil Satan-inspired infidels who blaspheme Allah
Right.
by saying that he had sex with a woman. And anyway, the other thing is to say that God became a man is almost as bad as saying that God had sex with Mary. So those two things alone are at the heart of their animosity towards Christians.
Mhm.
Good question, Vicky.
Yes.
That was a good question.
Oh, thank you. I'm curious, I'm curious.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it helps to understand where they're coming from. So
Yeah.
you don't, unconsciously or unknowingly trigger them, because there are some things that they cannot abide. But the other thing is, Dr. Gurney, the doctor that I used to travel with when I first went overseas, he
Mhm.
worked with the Muslims in Saudi Arabia for years.
Mhm.
He spoke Arabic, and everywhere he went, he would always go to the mosque in that city and go into the inner sanctuary and speak to the imam and preach the gospel to him.
Mhm.
And he always used the Gospel of John because
It's the gospel.
the Gospel of John calls Jesus the light of the world.
Mhm.
And this is a very common saying. In fact, it's in the Quran. Jesus, Kalamat Allah, means God, Jesus is the light of the world.
Mhm.
So they understand that word because they believe that Jesus was the light of the world in a certain respect. So he would use that as a segue to introduce them to Christ.
Hmm.
That Jesus is the light of the world. So it helps to understand what they do believe and what they do not believe and why.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we just make them more angry.
Well, thank you for
Anyway, the
sending
script-
that. Thank you for sending that about that man. You know, he was just, yeah. Jesus, if you're real, show me. Everything else he said, it didn't, nothing happened
Yeah,
until he said that. Yeah.
Well,
it's
good.
a powerful testimony for sure. And
Uh,
it not only overcame all the resistance in his own heart, but it overcame all his self-judgment and all his training.
Mhm.
It literally overturned his whole life.
Well, again, it was a spirit-led and filled thing. I mean, it was definitely a revelation from God, don't you think?
Yeah.
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 In prison. Yeah.
Yeah. God often meets us in prison. Look at Paul and Silas, you know. He caused an earthquake to, yeah, it's amazing. Anyway, is that a bit off topic or what was on your heart tonight?
Yeah, okay, well, we're going to look at James 1,
Okay.
verse 13. And James says in verse 13, let no man say when he's tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither does he tempt any man with evil. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then, when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, it brings forth death.
Mhm.
Do not err, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness or shadow of turning. Okay. Now, the word I wanted to look at is the word lust. It's in verse 15
Okay.
and verse 14. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away or drawn out or lured or to drag forth or entice, to drag away.
Mhm.
So my question that I want to throw out is lust evil
Mm.
or not? Is it evil or not?
Traditionally, it's very evil, but
It's only evil when you give in to it.
according to this, yes.
Okay. Yes, that's probably true.
I would
But
think lust is anything that's super empowering and, you know, we call it lust, right? But it could be something that's just so you believe so much in it. I can't explain it.
Mm.
yeah, you give yourself over to it. You surrender to it. Like Erica's saying, you let yourself go to it.
So
Okay.
is lust something that comes from God, or it must, because everything is from God.
That's exactly my question. Is lust evil or is it good?
Mm.
If it's from God, it's got to be good. If it's
Right.
from the devil, it's got to be evil. My
Yeah.
question is lust in itself
Excuse me.
evil or good?
Mm.
It can be evil and can be good, I guess. Depends what you do with it.
Yes. Exactly. The answer to the question is yes and no.
I mean, does sin exist outside of human beings and the devil? I mean, I don't think so. So, I mean, lust is just a concept. So how can a concept be sin?
Well, lust is more than a concept. Lust is a reality.
Well, lust isn't only becomes a reality if a human being grabs onto it.
That's a good point.
That's partly true, but not completely true. Lust is a real thing. Now, let's give an illustration. We've given this illustration before, but
Are you
lust,
saying like there's a spirit of lust? Is that what you mean?
there could be a spirit of lust, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, make yourself clear, man.
Okay, we're gonna try and do that. This is one of those things that you can walk around it, but you can't really show it to anybody. You can point to it, but you can't define it because in a way, well, it's definitely not a physical thing, but it is a real thing. So, like for example, is hunger a real thing?
Yeah, of course.
How do you know? Have you ever seen it?
I can feel it.
You can feel it. It's true. You feel it, but you can't really get your hands on it. You can't really dissect it and describe it and put it on in a lab and say, okay, yeah, I got it here. I got it in the bottle. I got hunger. It's here. It's hunger is the want of something that in itself it does not have or it is not. Like, for example, hunger in your stomach is the want of food. It's the lack of food. So is the lack of food something? Yes, it's a consciousness. It's a conscious state of want.
Mhm.
So it's real.
Mhm.
And like you said, you can feel it, you can experience it, and it is very wrathful when you go without food for a week. It starts to break down your very body and eventually you die. So if hunger can kill you, is it real?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think these are trick questions, Calvin.
You think what?
I said these are trick questions.
Well, it is kind of a trick question because it can easily be misunderstood. Like in this verse, you think, okay, every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust. You think, oh, that's bad. If you're drawn away of your own lust, that's bad. So evil, lust must be evil. And this very same verse is this same word is translated in many different places. Well, I don't know, many, 3 or 4 different places in the Bible as the word concupiscence. Do you know what the word concupiscence means?
Never heard of it.
Can't imagine.
Well, I'll tell you what it means. Here's a scripture in Romans chapter 7. But sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was dead. I was alive without the law, but when the law came, sin revived and I died. Okay? Another verse, Colossians chapter 3. Mortify therefore the members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, concupiscence, which is the same word, lust, covetousness, which is idolatry. Now that makes that there it's included in a list of things that are definitely not good. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 4 and 5. That every one of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in the lust of concupiscence, even as the Gentiles who do not know God. Okay, now if you look at those 4 verses, it sounds like lust is a bad thing. So what makes lust a good thing and what makes lust a bad thing? If it can be both good and bad. The key is in the verse we read in James chapter 1. But every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. The word enticed means to bait or to allure or to delude or beguile. So when our own lust beguiles us or deludes us or causes us to be drawn away, then it's not good. But how is lust good? If lust has a dark side, or can be used in a negative way, as Erica Sherry said, okay, how is lust used in a good way? What's the good
That's
side?
like asking how is covetousness? What's the good side of covetousness? There are other words
Okay,
for lust that are used in the English language that are not associated with sin. Why are you using the word
right.
lust?
Well, because lust is a craven want. That's what lust is. Lust is a consuming desire that has to be gratified. That's what lust is, right?
There are lots of words for that kind of thing, but we don't
Okay.
normally use the word lust in any kind of good way.
I know, and this is what I'm trying to overcome here, is because there is a very real way in which lust is extremely good. And that is exactly what I want to get at. And if we don't see this, then what happens is...
So instead of confusing us, why don't you use the words that we would recognize as being good?
Because there is no word in English that comes anywhere close to it.
Fervor? That's one that I can think of.
Yeah, but
it's not the same. It's not strong enough.
It's not strong enough.
Fervor is not strong enough?
No.
And the word itself in the Greek, according to Strong's, says desire, passionate longing, lust.
Yes. Yes.
Inordinate desire. Eagerness for is the positive. So there are some English synonyms for it.
I think it's a mistake to try and convince anybody that there's a good side to lust, because that's not how we understand it, Calvin.
Okay, if you're better with the word passion, or the word in the Greek is orge, which is translated in English as orgy. Orge is intense desire. That's getting close, but it's still not the word lust. And here's why I want to use the word lust, and I want you to see it in context in which God created it. In order that we would be able to love God with our whole heart. And this is why I use the word lust, because it has to involve our whole heart. And when lust is involved, it's something we give ourselves wholeheartedly to. That's what happens when you get caught in lust, which on the dark side. You're like,
but usually your brain is not engaged.
Yeah, like for instance, a heroin addict. A heroin addict's addiction to heroin could only be described in terms of a lust that consumes him mentally, emotionally, and physically. He's completely absorbed in it. He's completely given over to it, rationally, emotionally, psychologically, physically, every way of his body. He's just a complete junkie. Now, that is the true meaning of what God has created us as for himself. He has created us as a lust for himself, a complete, absorbing, wholehearted surrender to God. That's what we are. He created us as that. And in order that we would love God with our whole heart, which is the first and great commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your strength, all your might. That's lust. There's no other word for it. That is lust. It's a lust for God. And it's the number one commandment. You shall lust for the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole strength. And there is no way to minimize that. And any attempt to minimize it takes away from our love of God. It shortchanges us. It makes, well, okay, you got to be rational about this. You got to be reasonable about this. No, there is absolutely nothing reasonable about loving God with absolutely everything you are made of. It's not a
Sean,
reasonable.
I don't think they can, because they've been taken over by a demon or a devil. That's what addiction is.
Well, true, but we were created as an addiction for God. And when that addiction gets turned to something other than God, it brings forth evil, is my point. And it is the very lust that God created us with, when turned from God to something in creation, destroys us.
Yeah, but they
Because-
don't know how to do it, Sean. You know, that's the whole point of addiction. They hate themselves so much. They've been taken over by the devil.
Yes, it's true. But it is the very thing that has enabled them to be taken over by the devil that will allow them to be overtaken by God. It's my point.
Mm.
They don't have to learn this. Nobody has to learn to be an addict. It just happens. And nobody has to learn to love God with their whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. They just have to surrender their lust to God. But because we're told that our lust is evil, we try to suppress it and minimize it and destroy it and take it down instead of just turning it to God. Instead of turning it to God, we try to turn the knob down and say, oh, I got too much lust. You will never have too much lust. It's impossible, because all the lust that you have is given to you by God for the very reason that he wants you to turn to him with your whole heart. Now, wholehearted desire is lust. I don't care. There's no other word for it. Wholehearted desire and surrender and commitment is lust. That's the only word in the English language that can come close to it.
Well, my thinking is that they don't have a way of thinking that way. All they think about is they're so taken over by getting the next fix, you know.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And it's because, you know, the sad thing is most people who end up on the street addicted to heroin are religious. They've come from religious homes.
No, they're PKs. Parents are, yeah, religious probably.
Most of them are people who have been told that their lust is evil. And so they try to manage it. Rather than just feed their lust with God, they try to manage their lust. And the minute you start to manage your lust, you are in deep doo-doo.
Well, many
I
addicts.
don't believe
addicts
that
know.
for a half second. Most of these addicts are just in total and utter pain and
They're what?
suffering from serious trauma. It has nothing to do with lust.
They don't know how
Sorry,
to
I
manage their
I
lives.
can't understand you.
Well, that's the whole point, Sean. It's like you go to 12 steps and you know, the Jesus, I don't know what he's called. Anyway, it's like you can't manage, you're not managerial quality. You can't. You're
No, you can't.
so effed up.
Yeah. But this is where it starts, is that we are taught, and we teach ourselves too, that we can manage our lust. And our lust is not manageable. And as soon as we
Yes.
try to manage it, we get into trouble. And
Well,
we
we
go
can't even
we go
manage
into,
our own lives, Sean.
well,
Like,
because our own lives are a lust. We were
well,
created as a
yeah.
lust for God. That's all we are, is a lust for God. That's our whole sum total of our createdness.
It's like when you give, you know, I often think about, you know, what we talk about. It's like when you said I sacrificed, I gave my life to Jesus. I'm like, have I given my life to Jesus? I think about that a lot.
Well, this
I
is
don't
why
think I
this is
have.
why I'm bringing this subject up, is because this life, which we call our own life, is not manageable. It is such an insatiable desire for a infinite being that you can't manage it. And so any
Yeah.
attempt to manage it is going to destroy you, because your own lust, which you are created as from God, if you turn it from God and you try to manage it in your own ability, it is going to crush you. It is literally going to consume you. It's like a person who hasn't eaten for a week saying, okay, I can manage this hunger, so I'm just going to minimize my desire for food until you're dead. That hunger is going to kill you because you can't manage it. Your stomach was created as a lust for food. And if you do not give it what it was created to have, you are going to die. There's no two ways about it. You cannot manage your hunger. You have to feed it.
Mhm.
And if you don't feed it, it will kill you. That's the same on a spiritual level. If you do not feed your spiritual lust with what it was created to be fed with, it is going to kill you spiritually. You're going to die spiritually, which is what happens to most people. They're spiritually dead. And so because they have no connection to God anymore, they have no access to the bread that came from heaven, which why Jesus said, I am the bread that came from heaven to feed your lust. And if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you are going to die. You will have no life in you. But if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will live by me. Well, that is exactly on a physical level as same as saying, if you eat bread and drink water, you will live by that bread and that water. And if you do not, you will die,
Mhm.
which is exactly what Jesus said. If you do not eat me, you are going to die, because I am the only thing that will quench and satiate the lust that is in you, because it is a lust for me.
Mm.
And if you try to fill it with anything else, you are surely going to die. It's going to kill you. That lust is going to kill you.
It's a spiritual death, right? Well, that's what we're talking about.
It is a spiritual death. And by a spiritual
Yeah.
death, we mean a disconnect from the spirit world. When you die physically, you lose contact with the physical world. You don't disappear. You don't cease to exist. You just lose contact. You
Mm.
lose conscious contact with the physical world when you die physically. When you die spiritually, you lose conscious contact to the spirit world. You no longer have access on that dimension. You're completely cut off from it. And
Well,
when
can
you're
I?
cut off from
Oh, sorry, no, keep going. Sorry.
when you're cut off from the spiritual world, you do not have access to the one food that will quench your spiritual lust. And that lust is so intense, it is so infinite, that it will kill you. It will literally kill your physical body, because it is so all-consuming. And that's why I use the word lust, because It is all consuming. There is no possible way a human being can manage this lust. It's unmanageable because it is a lust for an infinite being. And there is nothing on this earth that will even come close to to quenching that thirst. It won't come close. And you can take heroin, you can take sex, you can take fame, you can take anything that is available on this plane of materiality, and it will only quicken your demise. Because nothing will touch it. Nothing. There is nothing on this plane that can quench that lust. That's how intense it is. And God created you with it. He created every human being with a hunger for himself, so that when we turn to God and we eat the bread of life, we are blessed with all the qualities of his goodness. When we eat good food on this level, all the benefits of the nutrition in that food, we live by that. And it satiates our hunger and it quenches our thirst. And we call that abundant life. It's healthful life. We're not even conscious of our body. We lose consciousness of our body. But when we start lacking nutrients, then we become body conscious. And it's called pain, and it's called suffering, and it's called discomfort, because we're conscious now of the death that is happening in our physical being. Our body is in a process of dying off. And that's what sickness is. Sickness is death in slow motion. That's what it is. You're dying by degrees, and it's painful. And it's excruciating, because the hunger for the nutrients in the food that you're lacking, that hunger is consuming your own body. It's breaking it down bit by bit, cell by cell, and it's taking the life out of it to keep the fire going in your stomach. Because you got to keep the body temperature's got to stay 98.6. If it drops down below that, it starts eating flesh, starts consuming itself. Now, if you flip that into the spiritual dimension, which everything in the physical dimension is a picture of something in the spiritual dimension, then we're talking about a hunger that is dangerous. Because if it is not fed with the right food, it will come back to bite us in a big way. It will literally overtake us. Now, people say, well, I got a demon, it's just making me do all kinds of evil. Most of the time, people who are driven by evil are driven by their own God-given lust that has never been satiated by God. And so it drives them into all kinds of evil in an attempt to satisfy this burning desire, which they have no idea where it's coming from. They think, oh, it's a demon. You know what? It's probably your own lust, which James talks about in this chapter. Now, what I wanted to point out here was how this lust works. What does James liken lust to? He likens it to something in the physical realm that is we're very familiar with. Let me read the verse. He says here, every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. And when lust has conceived, it brings forth. Now, what are those two terms used for to describe? Conceive and to bring forth. Okay, but what organ in the physical dimension conceives and gives birth?
Two different organs.
What'd you say, Sherry?
So those are two different organs, being, intimately familiar with them.
No, they're the same organ. It's called the womb or the uterus. The uterus conceives and it also gives birth. It's the very same organ. Now, Paul is he's comparing it to the physical organ called the womb. It receives a seed and it conceives, and then it gestates that seed and it brings forth, it gives birth to the full-blown form of that seed. If it's a cat or a dog or a human or whatever, the womb is the thing that does it. Now he says here, your lust is like a womb. It entices you, it's a desire. And if you think about a womb or a uterus, it is literally a hunger for the sperm. That's what it is. Because the minute a sperm comes the egg comes into the sperm, into the uterus, and it wants to be fertilized. That's what it's there for. It wants to be fertilized. It's not just there looking around and saying, oh, that's a nice day. No, it's looking for something to unite itself to. That's the desire. This organ is a desire.
That's the egg's desire.
It's an organ of desire. It wants to give birth. Well, Paul says, or James says, your lust is like that. It conceives and then it gives birth to sin. In other words, it accepts a lie and it gives birth to that lie, and it's an internal creation that your own lust gave birth to this evil. It gave your own lust conceived your own sin. The devil didn't do it, you did it. Your lust did this. Because your lust has the capacity, when it's impregnated with a seed, it will gestate that seed and give birth to what's called sin. And when that sin comes to full age, it kills you. It's right here. He says, then lust, when it's conceived, it brings forth sin, and when sin comes to its full form, it kills you. Now, this is not the devil who's creating sin in us. It's our own lust that's doing it. And that's why we have to say, is lust evil or is it good? Well, it's a God-given aspect of our being. If we get the wrong seed in that lust, it produces sin. But if we got the right seed, if we turn that craving desire, that lust toward the Word of God, which is called the seed of Christ, which is sown in everyone's heart, if all of our lust gets turned toward that seed and we gestate that seed, that gives that same lust that gave birth to sin, gives birth to righteousness. It gives birth to holiness. It gives birth to truth. It gives birth to heaven. So you can't destroy the lust or you'll lose heaven. You have to keep the lust in its full-blown, over-the-top extremity. But you just simply have to turn it to the right thing. Because if it's turned to the wrong thing, it's the mother of all evil. But if it's turned to the right thing, it's the mother of heaven. It gives birth to heaven inside you. So lust is not a bad thing. It's a God thing. But it cannot be managed by any human being. It must be given wholeheartedly to God to manage it. That's why he says, number one commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your strength, all your might. In other words, it is a total lust for God. You can't give any of that lust away to anything else. If you give a little bit of lust to this world, it will come back to bite you because it will give birth to something that will actually be your demise. But if you give your whole heart, all your lust in its full-blown form to the seed of Christ that is in your heart. This is why Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is inside you. It's within you. Because if your lust gets a hold of that seed, heaven is born in you. The whole of heaven, not just part of heaven. Heaven itself is born in us. Because that seed falls into that womb, and that womb nurtures it and gives birth to divine righteousness, divine holiness, divine connection with God, union life with God. And that is why it's very important to understand what lust is. Lust, God created lust with no evil in it. The devil came along and sowed evil into the lust. And so the lust gave birth to its children, to the devil's children, which is sin. Sin is S-I-N, Satan's incarnate nature. And what incarnates it in us is the lust that God gave us and made it as. We are made as that lust. And nothing can, you can't turn the knob down. You can't turn the dial down and say, oh, I shouldn't have so much lust. I shouldn't be so lustful. That is the worst thing you can do. But that's what we're taught. Religion, and I'm not blaming any religion here, they're all the same. Religion says, oh, you shouldn't have so much lust. You should have less lust. Now, in the old days, they used to flagellate themselves with whips and beat themselves up in the monasteries to get rid of their lust, to suppress and to minimize their lust. The dumbest thing anybody ever figured out. Well, we're not so primitive. Now, what we do in our day is we condemn ourselves. We're taught to judge ourselves for having lust. Oh, you should feel guilty for having lust. You should feel condemned. You should judge yourself. You should castigate yourself and abuse yourself spiritually. Just tell yourself you're a bad person for having so much lust. But what happens to that is all the self-condemnation gives rise to all kinds of autoimmune diseases, because all that lust is turned against our very created body, and it breaks down our immune system, and we get autoimmune diseases. But we would never think of whipping ourselves. We would never think of flagellating ourselves. Oh no, we're too cultured now. We only beat the hell out of ourselves emotionally and spiritually and say, oh, I'm just a terrible person to have so much lust. I'm trying to improve, and I just go around condemning myself all day long and telling myself how bad I am. And it's the same thing. You're trying to manage your lust, which is an unmanageable thing. It can't be managed. It can't be minimized. It can't be turned down. It can't be dampened. If you dampen it in somewhere, it'll break out somewhere else. Because it is an infinite lust. It is absolutely and completely and totally unmanageable by a human being.
Well, Sean, I have never had the feeling of lust for God. But I must honestly say, I have a continuous need for the presence of God in my life. I never even think of the word or of the concept of lust, because the word lust has been used for things for sinful things in this life. That's sort of what we grew up with.
It's true.
But when I
It's true.
feel a need for God to work in me in all situations, all day long, every day, I would almost say that's similar.
Right? Well, how would you describe you shall seek me and find me when you search for me with your whole heart? How would you describe wholehearted search?
Sincere.
Okay, yeah, it's sincere, but it's also focused. It's also all-consuming. It's also passionate in the sense of taking up my whole occupied emotional, mental, physical response. To wholeheartedly seek God, to seek God with my whole heart. I mean, it's almost unheard of. It's almost unheard of. And yet Jesus said, you will not find me unless you seek me with your whole heart. Because we're so cultured and we're so well, we don't want to get over the top, you know. We don't want to seem extreme. But like you listen to that testimony of that Muslim guy. Now that guy had a lust for Allah. His whole soul, body, mind, and strength was sold out to Allah. Now that is exactly what Jesus was talking about when he said, if you seek me with your whole heart. That guy was wholehearted.
Yeah,
And
but
like Nikki said over and
Sean,
over
it
again,
didn't work though for, many years. He begged Allah, he begged, he's praying and meditating, and all of a sudden
yeah,
Jesus
well,
showed up.
he was turning his lust to the wrong God, was his testimony.
Mm,
So
yeah.
all that lust turned to the wrong God, didn't produce anything good. It only produced more murder and Hezbollah, signing up with Hezbollah and all kinds of illegal stuff. Because
Yeah.
all of his lust was turned to the wrong source. But he still was wholeheartedly involved in what he was doing. He explains it very carefully. He gave his whole soul, heart, and mind and strength to his love of Allah. Now that is what Jesus is talking about. When that same lust that guy had was turned to Jesus. That's why this guy had such an amazing conversion overnight. Because he had all his lust focused in one place and he just had to flip it. Whereas most of us have to go around and find all our lust that's been distributed all over the planet. We have a little bit of lust for this. We have a little bit of lust for that. We have a little bit over here. We've portioned a little bit over there. We don't even know where our lust is gone. Because we've doled it out to 1,000 things.
I think
And so
that's
when
why
it
his
comes-
testimony, he was like sobbing and crying, whatever he'd gone through, right? And he was just like, it was so simple.
Yes, because his lust was focused. It was all gathered up by practice in one place. And when Jesus come along and said, this belongs to me, there was no effort involved. Absolutely no effort. He just fell into head first into God. Because his own heart pulled him in there. All of his lust just swallowed up everything that Jesus was. And since Jesus is the bread of life, he got a full meal deal in one night.
Yeah. In prison.
In prison. Because his lust was full blown, wide open, full throttle. And that's what Jesus said. You will find me when you give me your whole lust. Everything. Well, our religion, I mean, we look at the Christianity, we look at Islam, and we think these guys are extremists. We call them that all the time. They're extremists. Yeah, they are, but they're just extremists in the wrong direction. We should be just as extreme in the right direction, but we're not. We're sedated and we're temperate. We're casual about it. We don't want to be seen as extreme. We don't want to be, immodest or over the top, or, we certainly don't want to be seen as, well, that
Fanatic.
guy's out of control. No, we wouldn't do that. Well, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should just gather up all our prostituted desires that we've put on all the things in the world around us and gather them up and say, okay, God, these all belong to you. Every single desire of my heart that I've focused on, whatever it is I've focused on, thinking it would bring me some kind of benefit or peace or fulfillment or joy or happiness or whatever. I just need to take them all back and focus them back onto the bread of heaven and say, okay, I want to eat with the bread of heaven with all my desire. And then we wouldn't have to try to love God. We would just be like this Muslim guy. He just fell head over into Jesus. He didn't have to say, oh, Jesus, I got to think about it for a minute. Let me think. Should I love you? Can I love you? Do I have enough love to go for you? Jesus took his whole heart in a second, like just swallowed him up.
Well, isn't that the thing with us? Just I'm so tired of trying to fit in. I'm exhausted.
Well, it's it. Jesus said, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden with trying to find fulfillment in the world.
Yes, the world,
And
Sean. I can't do it
come
anymore.
unto me and learn of me. I am meek and lowly. In other words, feed on my meekness, feed on my lowliness, feed on my humility, and you will find satiation for your hunger. He said, you'll find rest for your souls. In other words, this hunger that is in your soul that has never been met by anything you've turned to in the world will be met by the nutrition that is in Jesus himself. And humility and meekness and patience are just some of the vitamins that are in Jesus when you eat them. And they bring quietness and satiation and gratification to that hunger, to that lust which you are. We are a lust for God, and nothing is ever going to change that. But we've tried 1,000 different things to ameliorate and sedate and gratify that lust in so many different avenues of life, and they've all come back to bite us. If we've lived long enough, they all come back to bite us, and they say, well, I didn't do anything. What do I got next? What do I got to try next? Oh, yeah, I haven't tried fame. Okay, well, I could try fame. I could try something else I haven't tried. But that only fractures our heart all the more. And we end up in a dissatisfied, unquenched, unsatiated state, still full of lust, hunger, thirst. Like, how many times did Jesus say, come unto me, all you that thirst? Come unto me, all you that are hungry. Come unto you, all that are labored and are heavy laden. He's saying that there is inside you this spiritual desire, craving. And it's more than just a desire. I mean, the word desire, that's pretty lukewarm. It can mean a lot of things, but it doesn't mean over the top, out of control lust. And that's all that God wants from us. He wants us to turn our full-blown lust onto him. And he says, you will actually find satiation. You will find rest. That craving hunger that's at the base of your soul will actually be abated if you eat me. And many people were offended when he said, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood. It says most of his disciples disappeared right there. They said, oh, this is a hard saying. We don't get this. We don't understand what he's talking about here. No, because they were getting gratification from too many things in the world. And so they had other areas that they could turn their lust toward that would suppress it temporarily. And so when Jesus said, the only solution is eating me, like, whoa, we're not going that extreme. We're not that radical. Why does it take a Muslim to get this?
Mm.
Why does a Muslim figure this out in a split second? And Christians can read this for decades and not understand what happened. Like, how'd that Muslim guy get that? How come? This is no mystery. This is as in your face as anything can ever get.
Well, Sean, he
Because
wasn't
we are
special. He wasn't special. He just, even though he prayed and he did this and that, and all of a sudden he asked Jesus. A lot of people ask Jesus. I'm asking Jesus for JP.
Yeah, they do. And James also says in this very same chapter, you ask and you do not receive, because you ask amiss that you may consume it upon your lust. It's the same lust. And James saying, the only reason you're asking for this thing is because you want to use it to satiate your lust. And so whatever I give you, you just consume it on your lust. Instead of coming to me to have your lust satiated, you want me to give you something in this world so you can satiate your lust. And he said, you're not going to get it, because you ask and you receive not, because you ask amiss in order to consume it on your lust. And I am not going to do that anymore, because you're not learning that nothing in this world will ever meet your lust. Like, we go to God and we say, oh God, I need to be healed. Please heal me. Why? Well, so I can feel better. That's consuming it upon my lust. I don't want to go to God and give my whole heart to God so that my lust is fed with God. I want to manage my lust. And I say, well, this part of my lust is out of control. And so my body's breaking down. Can you just give me this so I can consume it on my lust and feel better about myself? And James said, you're not going to get it, because you're using that thing you're asking from God to satiate your lust. And that's not what your lust is for. Your lust is for God. And so at some point, God is going to have to pull back on everything he gives you so that all your lust becomes focused on him. And that's what James is talking about. You ask and you do not receive. Why? Because you do not know that the lust you are made of is God ordained and was meant for God only. And you want stuff to satiate it with. You want this, and you want that thing, and you want the other thing. You want this world to give you the peace that it cannot give you. So the bottom line is to realize that lust is not a devil. Lust does not come from the devil. It's not demonic. It's not evil. God created us as a lust so that we would give birth to the Son of God in our own heart, and heaven would be born in us. And without that lust, there's no chance we'll ever come into union with God, because God is a seed inside of us, and it has to put down roots in our very spiritual womb. that lust, that spiritual lust that God has put inside all of us. And he's put that seed, he's planted that seed in the soil of that lust so that that seed would fall into the ground and die and bring forth much fruit on the inside.
Well, if you look around, Calvin, that seed doesn't seem very viable.
What doesn't seem very viable? The seed.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it's true because so many people don't even know that it's there. And it becomes so they don't look for it. They don't search for it. Jesus said, if you search for me,
didn't you start out this message by saying it is there? And
it's
that
what?
everybody has received the word already?
It's absolutely true. Everybody has the seed planted in their soul. And the reason that seed has not germinated is because their lust is turned to the things of this world. And therefore, lust is the only thing that will bring that seed to birth. And when the lust of their soul is turned to things on this earth, that seed sits there dormant. It does not hatch, it does not germinate, it does not bring forth heaven in the soul. And the person lives his whole life without any union with God at all. But,
More obvious. Just
sorry?
curious. Why wouldn't God have made it more obvious?
Well, Paul said this over and over. He said, this is a mystery, this mystery of Christ in you, your only hope of glory. James said the same thing. He said, receive with meekness. This seed has to be received with meekness. Most people live their life in pride, self-exaltation, self-management, self-governing, self-ruling. Oh, I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do my best. I'll do my best for God, but I'm in control. Well, that's not humility. That's not meekness. And so the seed never germinates because we resist it.
God do
Our
that?
will. What's that?
Why would God do such a thing? Create
Well, this
world
is what we started out by
world full
saying.
of
We are created as a lust for God, and that lust equips us to be fed by God and nurtured by God. For example, we said this a couple of weeks ago, if your stomach was not made for food, then food wouldn't be a thing. Nobody would want food, and nobody would farm food, and nobody would buy food, and nobody would spend any money for food. But because our stomach is a want of food and a desire for food, food is extremely important. And we spend a lot of time earning money to buy food. And it consumes a lot of our life, preparing it and growing it and eating it. Because our stomach was made for food. Well, and so food is nutritious for us. It brings us health, physical health. And it satiates our hunger, so we're at peace. Well, if we were not created as an absolute hunger for an infinite God, we would be in no way fitted to join up and come into union with God, because we wouldn't have any hunger for him at all. So we have to be made as a hunger for food. If we're not a hunger for food, we'll never join up with God. We'll never have union life.
Billions of people won't.
Well, it certainly looks that way, but we don't know the end result. And when people come to die and cross through the veil, we have no idea how prepared the soil of their soul is for that seed to germinate. And just because we have this cockeyed idea that the last breath you breathe is the end of anything God can ever do for you, we might be wrong. We might be completely wrong. And who knows, maybe the death of a physical body is the exact thing that opens us up the most for that seed to germinate. After a lifetime of wandering around lost without connecting with that seed, maybe death is the only way we will. We do not know that, but there's a good chance that that's the truth.
I hope so.
Because Jesus said, you cannot follow me unless you deny yourself, pick up your cross daily, and pick up your cross daily means you die to self and follow me. Well, that's a pretty good description of physical death right there. Denying yourself and taking up your cross is the end of the road. That's what taking up your cross is. It's the end of the road. You don't have any more mortgage to pay, no more car payments. It's the end. Well, that's a pretty good picture of physical death. So how do we know that physical death is not the most opportune moment for our soul to come into union with the God who is inside us?
Guys, do you mind if I stop this? Because my
Yeah, I
family's
need to
waiting
go
to
at
use the
one.
Zoom. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I guess we're gonna have to
Yeah.
say goodnight for now and maybe continue next week, whatever you
Good
Okay.
do.
night, Kent.
Thanks a lot,
Night,
guys.
everyone.
Good night.